Did Elvis sing with more stars than we remember? Was the king of rock and roll secretly one of music's greatest collaborators? Number 12. The Lost Session with Buddy Holly. What if two rock and roll pioneers had actually recorded together? Few fans realize that Elvis Presley and Buddy Holly crossed paths in early 1955 when both were performing in Lubbock, Texas. According to Billy Bob McPherson, a sound engineer who worked at Norman Petty Studios, Elvis and Buddy spent an afternoon jamming together during this period. The impromptu session reportedly included a duet version of "That'll Be the Day," with Elvis taking the second verse. Tragically, the tape of this historic meeting was never formally released, with rumors suggesting it was either lost in a studio fire in the 1960s or remains locked in a private collection. Holly's former bandmate Waylon Jennings once mentioned in a 1978 interview that he had heard the recording and called it two young lions finding their roar together. The Elvis-Buddy collaboration remains one of music's most tantalizing lost treasures, with collectors offering substantial rewards for anybody who might have a copy. The timing makes perfect sense. Both artists were at turning points in their careers, with Elvis about to sign with RCA and Holly still developing his signature sound. Imagine how music history might have changed if these two legends had formed a more permanent partnership before Holly's untimely death in 1959. Number 11. The Christmas Carol with Brenda Lee. Ever wonder if Elvis recorded holiday music with other stars? During the 1967 Christmas season, Elvis and teenage singing sensation Brenda Lee recorded an unreleased version of Silver Bells at RCA's Nashville studio. Lee, already famous for rocking around the Christmas tree, was visiting the studio when Elvis was recording material for his upcoming Christmas album. According to studio musician Harold Bradley, who was present that day, Elvis heard Brenda was in another studio and insisted she come over. Before anybody knew what was happening, they were singing together at the same microphone. The collaboration seemed natural. Both artists had similar Southern backgrounds and powerful voices despite their physical differences. Lee was famously petite, earning her the nickname Little Miss Dynamite. The recording remained unreleased, reportedly, because of contractual complications between their record labels. Lee herself confirmed the session in a 2010 interview with Country Weekly magazine, saying, "Singing with Elvis was like touching musical electricity. He was so kind and insisted I take the high harmony, which made me nervous. But he kept saying I was doing great." Only a handful of insiders have heard the recording, describing it as a soulful, gospel-tinged interpretation that showcases both singers at their emotive best. Number 10. The Secret Jam with Beatles members. Could Elvis have recorded with members of the Beatles despite their famous rivalry? The much-discussed 1965 meeting between Elvis and the Beatles at his Bel Air home isn't the full story. According to Elvis's longtime friend Jerry Schilling, John Lennon and George Harrison actually returned to Graceland in 1966 for a private jam session. This occasion, deliberately kept quiet due to Elvis's manager, Colonel Parker's, concerns about his image, resulted in informal recordings of several blues standards, including Matchbox and That's All Right. Elvis studio engineer Al Pachucki was reportedly present with portable recording equipment. The session remained secretive, partly because Elvis was making primarily movie soundtracks at this point, while the Beatles were experimenting with more progressive sounds. Former Elvis band member Scotty Moore confirmed in his autobiography that he heard the tapes once, describing them as loose but inspired with Elvis and the Beatles, finding common ground in their early rock and roll influences. Beatles historian Mark Lewison has acknowledged rumors of the collaboration but notes that no documentation exists in EMI's official archives. Harrison reportedly referenced the session obliquely during a 1987 interview, saying, "Some of the best music happens when the tape isn't officially rolling, and that includes once in Memphis with someone we all admired enormously. The recordings, if they exist, represent a historic bridge between two defining acts of 20th century music." Number 9. The country duet with Patsy Cline. What if Elvis had recorded with country music's greatest female voice before her tragic death? In late 1962, Elvis, Presley, and Patsy Cline reportedly recorded a version of the standard "Have You Ever Been Lonely" during an after-hours session at RCA's Studio B in Nashville. This collaboration occurred just months before Celine's fatal plane crash in March 1963. According to Owen Bradley, Celine's producer, it was just one of those magical Nashville nights. Patsy was finishing up a session, Elvis stopped by after a movie wrap party, and they ended up singing together until nearly dawn. The duet coate both singers' ability to transcend genres, with Elvis bringing his rock sensibility to Celine's country sophistication. The recording remained unreleased, primarily because Elvis was focused on his movie career at the time, and following his death, Colonel Parker reportedly worried that releasing the track might appear exploitative. Country music historian Robert K. Orman claims to have heard the recording once during research at RCA's archives, describing it as goosebump-inducing. Their voices blend in a way that makes you realize they both came from the same southern soil. Celine's husband, Charlie Dick, mentioned the collaboration in his memoir, noting that Patsy called it the most natural singing I've ever done with another person. If released today, this recording would represent a pivotal meeting of two legendary vocalists who helped define American music in the 20th century. Number 8. The Blues Experiment with B.B. King. Did Elvis secretly record with the King of Blues? While Elvis Presley's blues influences are well documented, few know about his 1960 impromptu recording session with B.B. King at the Riverside Hotel in Memphis. The two had known each other since Elvis's early days at Sun Records, with King later recalling, "Elvis used to come hear me play when he was just a young boy with big dreams." According to blues historian Peter Gorilnik, the Riverside session included raw versions of "Every Day I Have the Blues" and "How Blue Can You Get," with Elvis handling some verses while King played his signature guitar. Sam Phillips, founder of Sun Records, was reportedly present and helped coordinate the informal recording. The session remained unreleased due to contractual restrictions. Elvis was signed to RCA while King recorded for Kent Records at the time. B.B. King mentioned the collaboration occasionally in interviews, telling Living Blues magazine in 1991, "Elvis had real feeling for the blues. When we sang together, it wasn't black and white, it was just the blues." King's former road manager Jim McGrew claimed to have heard the tape in the 1970s, describing it as loose but soulful, with Elvis showing a grittier side in his popular recordings. Music journalists have speculated that these recordings would reveal Elvis's authentic connection to African American music more clearly than any of his official releases. Number 7. The Gospel Session with Mahalia Jackson. Could Elvis have recorded sacred music with the Queen of Gospel? In 1957, during a rare break from his punishing performance and movie schedule, Elvis Presley participated in an informal gospel recording session with Mahalia Jackson at Radio Resorters in Hollywood. According to Elvis's backup singer Mildred Staples, Elvis was in awe of Mahalia. When they sang "Peace in the Valley" together, there wasn't a dry eye in the studio. The collaboration made musical sense. Elvis had grown up immersed in Southern gospel music and would release his first gospel album, His Hand in Mine, just a few years later. Jackson, already a legendary figure in gospel music, reportedly appreciated Elvis's genuine respect for the tradition. Sound engineer Larry Schnapf, who witnessed the session, later told Gospel Heritage magazine, "When those two voices joined together, it was like hearing the perfect marriage of sacred and secular American music." The recordings were never commercially released, with some suggesting that Colonel Parker worried about Elvis appearing too religious at the height of his rock and roll fame. Others believe the session was simply meant as a private expression of faith for both artists. Jackson herself mentioned the collaboration in her 1966 autobiography, noting that Elvis had a true feeling for gospel music that surprised me with its depth and sincerity. Gospel music historians consider this session the holy grail of unreleased Elvis material. Number 6. The studio experiment with Ray Charles. What happened when two genre-crossing pioneers met in the studio? In early 1963, Elvis Presley and Ray Charles reportedly recorded together during a late-night session at Western Resorters in Los Angeles. According to pianist Glenn D. Hardin, who later joined Elvis's band, it was one of those magical accidents. Ray was finishing a session, Elvis came in to do some movie soundtrack work, and they ended up jamming for hours. The spontaneous collaboration included versions of What I Say and I Got a Woman, both Ray Charles hits that Elvis had covered in his live shows. The session represented a meeting of two artists who had revolutionized American music by blending gospel rhythm and blues, country, and pop. The recordings remained unreleased because Elvis was under exclusive contract to RCA, while Charles recorded for ABC Paramount at the time. Ray Charles mentioned the session in his autobiography, writing, "Elvis had a natural feel for rhythm and blues that surprised me. He wasn't just a white boy imitating, he truly understood the heart of the music." Sound engineer Chuck Britz, who worked the session, told Music Connection magazine in 1990 that the recordings captured two masters recognizing each other's gifts, pushing each other to new heights. Music historians consider this collaboration particularly significant because both artists were pioneers in crossing America's musical color lines. Number 5. The Las Vegas Duet with Tom Jones. Did two of Vegas's biggest stars secretly record together? During Elvis Presley's landmark 1969 return to live performing at the International Hotel in Las Vegas, he and Welsh singing sensation Tom Jones reportedly recorded an after-hours duet version of Without Love, There Is Nothing. According to Elvis's longtime friend and Memphis Mafia member Marty Lacker, Elvis and Tom had mutual respect. After their shows one night, they headed to the studio with just a small group of musicians and knocked out a few songs. Jones and Presley had become friends earlier in the 1960s, bonding over their similar powerful vocal styles and working-class backgrounds. The recording remained unreleased primarily because Elvis's manager, Colonel Parker, disapproved of the collaboration, worrying it might diminish Elvis's solo stardom. Jones has referred to the session in several interviews, telling The Guardian in 2012, "Elvis and I sang together many times, but usually just fooling around backstage. The night we actually recorded something proper was special. Two friends doing what they loved." Vegas musician Ron Foyer, who played keyboard that night, described the recording as electric. Two massive voices trying to outdo each other in the best possible way. The duet represents a fascinating meeting of two powerhouse localists who defined the Vegas entertainment era with their shared appreciation for soul, gospel, and country influences clearly audible in the unreleased track. Number 4. The Nashville Session with Johnny Cash. What if two Tennessee legends had recorded more than we know about? The friendship between Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash dates back to their early days at Sun Records in the 1950s, but few fans realized they reunited in the studio in 1959 at a Nashville recording session. According to Marshall Grant Cash's longtime bass player, Johnny and Elvis got together at RCA Studio B when both happened to be in town. They recorded about 4 songs, mostly old gospel numbers they both grew up with. The session reportedly included duet versions of How Great Thou Art and I'll Fly Away, putting both men's deep roots in Southern religious music. Cash's daughter Roseanne mentioned the session in her memoir, recalling her father talking about sitting around a piano with Elvis, singing the songs they both learned in church as boys. The recordings remained unreleased due to contractual complications. Cash was signed to Columbia Records, while Elvis recorded for RCA. Recording engineer Chuck Seitz, who worked that night, told Country Music Magazine, "It wasn't about commercial potential. It was two friends from similar backgrounds, reconnecting through the music that shaped them." This collaboration is particularly meaningful to music historians because it occurred just as both artists were evolving. Elvis was preparing to return from military service, while Cash was establishing himself as a major voice in American music beyond just country. Number 3. The Beach Boys crossover. Could Elvis have collaborated with America's other musical royalty? During the summer of 1966, Elvis Presley participated in an unpublicized recording session with Brian Wilson and other members of the Beach Boys at United Western Resorters in Los Angeles. According to Don Randy, a session pianist who worked with both acts, Brian was at his creative peak around Pet Sounds, and somehow Elvis ended up in the studio one night. They worked on a version of Good Vibrations with Elvis singing lead on some parts. This unlikely pairing brought together the established king of rock and roll with the emerging innovators of California pop, just as the music industry was undergoing a creative revolution. The session remained unreleased because Elvis's manager, Colonel Parker, reportedly disapproved of the experimental nature of the collaboration, while Brian Wilson was entering his most complex creative period. Beach Boys historian Keith Badman confirmed the session in his chronology of the group, citing studio logs and interviews with witnesses. Bruce Johnston of the Beach Boys mentioned it obliquely in a 1976 interview, saying, "There was a night when American music royalty came together in Studio 3, but the world wasn't ready for it." The recording represents a fascinating what-if moment when Elvis might have connected with the avant-garde direction popular music was taking in the mid-1960s, instead of continuing with his movie soundtrack formula. Number 2. The Folkexperiment with Bob Dylan. Did music's greatest lyricist secretly record with its greatest voice? In late 1964, Elvis Presley and Bob Dylan reportedly met for an unpublicized recording session at Columbia's Studio A in Nashville. According to producer Bob Johnston, who worked extensively with Dylan, it was arranged very quietly. Dylan admired Elvis enormously, and somehow Colonel Parker agreed to let them try a few things together. The session allegedly included Dylan's Blowin' in the Wind and a reworked version of Elvis's Heartbreak Hotel, with additional verses written by Dylan. This meeting of musical giants occurred at a pivotal moment. Dylan was moving from folk toward rock, while Elvis was struggling to maintain relevance amid the British invasion. The collaboration remained unreleased, with speculation that neither artist's management saw commercial potential in such an unexpected pairing. Dylan researcher Clinton Halen uncovered documentation of the session during archival research telling Uncut magazine. The stylistic differences were significant, but they shared a rebellious spirit and understanding of American roots music. Dylan himself referenced the meeting cryptically in his Chronicles autobiography, mentioning, "A night in Nashville when the King showed me he understood what my songs were trying to say." If released today, this collaboration would represent a historic convergence of two defining voices of 20th century American music, Elvis's emotional vocal power meeting Dylan's poetic lyricism. Number 1. The unreleased duet with Frank Sinatra. Could America's two greatest male vocalists have recorded more than we know about? The televised 1960 Welcome Home Elvis special with Frank Sinatra is well known, but according to Sinatra's longtime pianist Bill Miller, the two singers also recorded several unreleased studio tracks during this period. Frank and Elvis spent an afternoon at Capitol Records after the TV show wrapped, Miller told Variety in a 1991 interview. They recorded Are You Lonesome Tonight? And In the Wee Small Hours as duets, with each taking verses and harmonizing on choruses. This collaboration united the defining male vocalist of the 1940s with his 1950s successor, bridging the pre-rock and rock eras of American popular music. Despite initial public perception of rivalry between the two, they reportedly shared mutual respect. The recordings remained unreleased due to contractual complications. Sinatra recorded for Reprise Records, while Elvis was with RCA. Sinatra's daughter Tina mentioned the session in her memoir, writing that her father came home genuinely impressed with Elvis's musicianship and professional approach. Elvis's friend Jerry Schilling confirmed that Presley considered the collaboration a validation from the established show business world he'd always respected. Sound engineer Al Schmidt, who worked at Capitol during this period, told Recording Engineer magazine about witnessing two titanic voices, finding surprising compatibility despite their different approaches, Sinatra's precise phrasing, playing against Presley's emotional intensity. This collaboration represents perhaps the most significant, unreleased duet in American popular music history. Did Elvis leave behind more musical treasures than we ever imagined? Will these legendary collaborations ever see the light of day?